think what we wanted to do today was sort of like a little video to introduce ourselves to everyone out there, to introduce the project, talk a little bit about some of the details, and give a background of where we're coming from and where we're hoping to go.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so I mean, you're the sort of the impetus for all this. Why don't you start us off? Like, who are you, and how did you get to this place?
Sure. So I'm Steven, or Galophile, as many of you would know me from my monikers. I've been writing D&D content since about 2015, 2016. All 5e, always 5e. Played a little bit of 3.5, but mostly my D&D experience has been 5e. So I started Star Wars 5e as a very terrible little home project for a table of five, and we had a lot of fun. It was really bad. And then I tabled it for a while, started it again. I think it's been 6 years. I think it was 2018, and it got really popular really fast. And so I wrote that for about 4 years and have since moved on to this new project.
Yeah, I'm Rick. So I got into role-playing games in college, a lot older than that now. And I started off in third edition. We played a lot of fourth edition, where I GM'd for many years. And then we moved over to fifth edition when that came out, and I've GM'd and played in fifth edition quite a bit. I've also played in other systems like GURPS, Vampire the Masquerade, all kinds of different things. Powered by the Apocalypse. And so, in addition to role-playing games, I also really enjoy board games, and my friends and I sometimes develop our own board games. So, I'm coming to this both from a player standpoint, a game master standpoint, and a game design standpoint, and hope to bring sort of all those experiences and interests to make a great product for GMs and players out there. So maybe we can start off by talking about the class design, sort of the first thing that players are going to get into. They're going to make their characters. How is this like fifth edition? How is it different? And what's that process like?
So in 5e, the two best designed classes are Warlock and Rogue for two very different reasons. Warlock has multiple levels of customization in their subclasses, their invocation system, and then their packs. So they have three. That's awesome. Rogues are the best designed in regard to action economy because they have a consistent action, bonus action, and reaction at fifth level. Their bonus actions, of course, come from cunning action, and then at fifth level, they get uncanny dodge, which is a reaction. So my goal with class design in both Star Wars 5e and now into Unbound Realms is to maximize, to utilize both those concepts. So every class has two levels of customization. They have their subclasses, which all come online and improve at the same levels. And then they also have their invocation system. Some of them have passive invocations similar to Warlock, whereas others have very dynamic and unique invocation systems tailored to that class. And then for action economy, every class should have some use for its bonus action very quickly. And then they should also get access to uses for their reaction, which will vary dramatically by class and how they choose to invest their customization.
Yeah, and let's pause there for a second on fighters, because as someone who's played and GM'd a lot of fifth edition, I know some of my players and myself, really felt that sometimes it's not very fun playing a fighter that all they do is hit stuff. And what are some ways that our equivalent of fighter, the champion class, really improves upon that sort of dull feeling from fifth edition?
So the big thing that champions get is they get tactics, which are very similar to maneuvers, and if they allow them to replace an attack or enhance an attack in some way. Additionally, this book adds a lot more attack replacers similar to grappling and shoving, in that there's at least one for every skill. So you can utilize your skills in combat more readily by replacing an attack in the attack action, or if you take the feat for that skill, you can also do it as a bonus action. I think those two things do a lot to engage, and then additionally, a champion gets a fighting style, so they have a bonus action from that. So if a duelist has the opportunity to reroll an attack when they miss using their bonus action. So there's a lot of things like that to really add more engagement, to enhance just the attack action itself, and then enhance the rest of the turn as well.
I think that's a good summary, and I just want to emphasize that I think viewing this from the outside, since you developed those rules in particular, that I think you really nailed what was missing there and avoided the pitfalls of what they tried to do in fourth edition, where every class just became a wizard with different magic powers, right? Here, the classes, or at least the schools, have very distinct mechanics and different play styles without all feeling the same, but all being effective and fun and interesting to play. And yeah, I'm really impressed with the game design on those mechanics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear that. I'm very happy with how it's panned out. The goals being, of course, that every class has a core feature that's part of their school. So, for instance, the superior school has the three classes of scholar, specialist, and champion. All of them use superiority, which is tactics. But they also go about it in very different ways. Specialist is brand new in that it focuses on consumables. Scholar is very focused on enabling allies. It's a very support-oriented class that can still function on its own. And then champion is your bread and butter fighter who just attacks a lot. Um,
No, but just not just attacks a lot, attacks interestingly too.
Attacks a lot and gooder.
Let's talk a little bit more about the customization. You mentioned feats briefly, but maybe walk us through a little bit more about the feats and other customization options that we've got.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to talk about feats again really quick. So feats are split into two tiers. There are major and minor feats. Over the course of leveling from 1 to 20, you will get 5 minor feats and 4 major feats for a total of 9, in addition to your ability score increases. Major feats, again, are more impactful than minor feats, where minor feats add typically smaller features. But those are, I'm very excited to see those blended in better because I know that they add a lot to customization. Additionally, we have fighting and casting style trees. Each of those is divided into 3 components, and you can mix and match, but there's a natural, obvious pairing. In 5e, for instance, there is a great weapon fighting style, which lets you reroll 1s and 2s on specific weapon damage dice. And then there is great weapon mastery, which lets you do more with those same weapons. Very natural pairing. So we dialed that up to 11. There are 40 fighting style trees, each with 3 components. And there are 12 casting style trees, each with 3 components. And again, you can mix and match depending on your play style. For instance, if you want to play a sword and board type of fighter, you could have the dueling fighting dabble, and you could take the shield fighting practice, and they just synergize with each other because they're both one-handed items. So very exciting. And one of the other things we've done is that part of the action economy, every fighting and casting style, the first and second tiers, focus on enabling a bonus action and a possible reaction if you take both. So that's a good way to blend in that action economy to your normal use. But either way, so those are a key component that every asterisk class gets access to one or the other. And it might be through the core class feature or an invocation. We also have battle forms, which are emphasized by the Battle Mind class. These are another series of bonus actions that work in addition to, rather than instead of, fighting and casting styles. They're very fun, very cool thing to see implemented. And then finally, we have traits. So traits are a key component to generating species and backgrounds, but you also earn additional traits as you level up. Every time your proficiency bonus increases, you earn more traits, which lets you do things like earn a new class proficiency or a skill proficiency, or grow your skill proficiency into expertise, or improve your Dragonborn breath weapon. So there is a lot of customization, and I'm very excited to see people utilize it. I'm going to say this again with an asterisk. I'm pretty sure every class has a choice from 3rd level to 17th. So there's a lot. There's no level where you don't get anything. So feats are a much greater emphasis in Unbound Realms than they were in 5e or in SW5e. You get feats alongside your ability score improvements rather than instead of. Additionally, you get feats at alternating levels. And there are 2 tiers of feats that are major and minor. Major are the very impactful feats, like what you're used to seeing in 5e, and minor feats are much smaller and give more flavorful options rather than the power gamey ones.
Yeah, you make some good points there. As a player and as a GM, when I see my players playing, I know especially at low levels, playing just 5th edition straight, there can be some frustration as a player when you win and you finally get your turn to do something, and you roll your attack and you miss, and then you've just not done nothing, right? Because you don't have a bonus action or a reaction at early levels. And so I have noticed when we play SW5e, or when we've been playing and play testing Unbound Realms, my players just have a little bit better of a time because they feel like there are more strategic choices to be made, and also that they're accomplishing something even if they miss on their attack roll or something like that. So I do think that it's both a great way to balance the system a little bit better, so the classes are more balanced and on the same power level, but also to give players better time just playing the game. So I think that's a great improvement to the system as well.
That's good. That's what I want to hear because I want that engagement. That's really like the big key word. I want every player to feel more engaged on their turns. Um, by third level, specifically, everybody should have a minor action, a bonus action. And then typically by fifth level, everybody will have their own reaction outside of their feat and other customization selections. So that's what I want to hear, and that's great.
So now I know we also have as a design principle, sort of stripping out the flavor from the rules and focusing more on mechanics so that the system can be used for sort of any setting, right? You can play in a horror setting, you can play in sci-fi, you can play in fantasy. Can we talk a little bit more about that approach and specific instances of how we've gone about that in this process?
Sure. So the classes in Unbound Realms come in 5 schools. There are the Arcanists, which are traditional spellcasters, the Focused, which use an internal mechanic called Focus that is unique to class, Psionicists, who use psionics, the Superior, who use tactics and something similar to Focus, and then finally Technologists, right? So one of the cool things is that since these are 5 unique schools, if you're playing in a setting that doesn't have magic or doesn't have the tech, you can just cut that school and you still have the other 12 classes to play with, or you can customize that school to instead use a different mechanic. For instance, you could customize your Technologists to instead use psionics. If you like the class of tech, one of the tech classes, but you want to use psionics instead, you can do that. So that's a huge part. And then flavor in general, one of the problems I've always had with 5e is that flavor, a lot of times flavor will be blended in with the mechanics, so you don't know when the mechanics start and the flavor ends, and so there's some kind of conflation of what something can do. So trimming out a lot of the flavor allows much more clear and cut mechanics and to understand how an ability works. And additionally, flavor is fluid. You can reflavor anything to be whatever you want because it doesn't impact mechanics at all. You cast the spell Fireball, your Fireball might be a traditional, just a fiery explosion that starts in that little orange P and blows up, or it might be a grenade that you launch from your launcher on your wrist pad, or your Fireball might be blue fire or pink fire, whatever you want it to be, right? That's all flavor. That doesn't matter. And so it can be whatever you want. So really the emphasis is the mechanics because that's the most important part of.
Okay, so but if we're losing this flavor, what about someone who wants to play a druid or a ranger? Are they going to be losing out because we don't have a druid class or a ranger class or a cleric class?
So ranger's very easy because the tech class of scout has a lot of the bones of ranger and has very similar functionality in combat. But if you don't want to play it as tech, if you want to play a traditional magic scout, you can do that. So there's a very easy way to just swap over the tech casting to spell casting, and then you basically have your ranger back. For druid and cleric, those are both going to be based in the Archon class, which is the full magic caster, spellcaster. So you would choose spells that tie to your how you want. If you want to be a nature caster, or you want to be a divine caster, you choose the spells that are appropriate to that. You choose that as your origin for your casting, which impacts the ability score you use for casting. And then the Archon invocation system has options that are very skewed towards nature or like the arcane or towards the divine. So you can really build through your spell selections, through your chosen origin for your casting, and through those channel options to really represent a druid or a wizard or a cleric.
So you just mentioned casting origins. I don't think we've really touched on that in detail in any videos so far. Can you go a little bit more into that, both for spells and for the other powers?
So all 3 casting schools, that's the Arcanists, which are your spellcasters, the Psionicists, which are your psi casters, and then the Technologists, which are your tech casters, use a very similar system of casting, but they go about it in very different ways. So resources is a big one. Tech casters use points. Those points refresh on a short rest, but you don't get that many of them. Psi casters use points as well. Those points refresh on a long rest, and you get more of them. And then your Arcanists use spell slots like normal. So if you've used any of the spellcasting classes in 5e, you'll be familiar with this system. Additionally, you choose an origin. The 3 origins available for spellcasters are Sacred, Primal, and Occult. And that choice determines what ability score you use. For instance, if you choose Occult as your spellcasting origin, you would use Intelligence or Charisma. You choose one of those 2 as your spellcasting ability. But you wouldn't have Wisdom as an option if you choose Occult. And then similar choices are made for Primal and Sacred. Additionally, the spells are divided instead of 8 schools in 5e of transmutation and evocation and whatnot. There are 3 schools that are those same Occult, sacred, and primal. And whatever origin you choose, it is easier to learn those spells, and it's harder to learn the spells of the other schools. You still can, so you still have access to a wide breadth, but you really have to focus on the intent is that you should focus on whichever origin you choose.
Okay, so in this case, the mechanics help drive the flavor, but don't restrict the flavor.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then can you talk a little bit about the different origins for psi and technology?
So they don't have origins in the same way. The way that psionics works is that they have three subtypes of powers. Though their powers are called talents, and they have agnostic, empathic, and psychic talents. So empathic talents always use your wisdom modifier as your casting ability. Psychic talents always use your charisma modifier as your casting ability, and agnostic talents use your choice. So instead of them choosing an origin when they gain the psi casting feature, they have a very fluid. They select powers like normal, and then depending on what type they cast, that determines the ability they use. So if somebody wants to be a wisdom psi caster, they would want to focus on empathic and agnostic talents, whereas psychic talents they could still use, but they might not be as effective with them. For tech uses modules instead of talents or spells, and the modules have three subtypes as well. Go figure. Those subtypes are hardware, software, and wetware. And when you gain the tech casting feature, you choose two of those, and one of them becomes easier for you to cast. Each talent of first degree or higher costs one less point, and then the other one is more difficult for you to cast, and each one costs one more point.
That's interesting. Yeah. So I think anybody who's played SW5E before will recognize the bones of the psi casting classes and the powers there as the force casters from SW5E, although there are some minor differences still, but that'll be recognizable there. Yeah, that all makes sense, Steve. How about we transition to talking about some of the things that we think that Unbound Realms really improves upon base fifth edition, or where fifth edition sort of fell flat on its face. And one of the things I'm thinking of first is sort of rules for traveling and adventuring. Like that whole pillar seems very underdeveloped in traditional 5e.
So one of the things we've done with Unbound Realms is we've created new rules for traveling. So real big focus on adventuring. So what we did is we created those rules so that they require player engagement. You make choices, traveling occurs. It's still done at a grander scale of time, right? You can travel a day. If nothing interesting happens, it only takes a couple of minutes of game, but things can happen. Additionally, we've created rules for camping. So you have decisions to make if you're going to camp in the wilderness and try to complete a long rest. And then we have rules for creating environments, such as a tundra, or if you're going through a mountain or a wasteland, there are rules for all these things. So it's a very rules light experience in that it establishes the baselines of how these different environments and these different capacities in the environments work, and then how the players interact with them to mitigate the circumstances caused by an environment. So I think it's a very novel mechanic system. It's something we'll expand on to create more things down the road. And it's one of the most novel things I think we've done in Unbound Realms.
Yeah, and I have to say, as a GM, I've run these rules with several of my play groups, and the players have enjoyed them, and I found it to be a very useful tool because as a GM, one of the goals is to sort of tell a story. I mean, you're doing it collaboratively, right? But ideally, you structure the story around the important beats. But when you have parties going on an adventure through a wilderness, there's all that stuff that would be a montage in a movie, right? You just see them traveling, and maybe they get into a fight here or there, but it's not part of the main story. But you want them to experience it in some way, and we've been able to create these rules, and we've used these rules to really enable a feeling that the players are really traveling through the wilderness. They are encountering monsters and hazards and the terrain itself without bogging down the game and having to play out every encounter, every encounter with a bear that you run across or something like that. It's a good intermediary between having to play everything out and having to just fast forward all travel. So we've really enjoyed it, and I think it is a great addition to the system. So another place where I think 5e maybe doesn't do everything it could is death and dying, and from my perspective, the reason for that is because once you're in that realm and you're dying, now you have nothing to do. You're just waiting there, hoping You don't die rolling a die every turn to see whether or not you die. You have no choices to make. And that just doesn't feel good as a player. And so we sort of reconceptualize dying in this. Some of you could tell us a little bit about that.
Exactly right. So now, instead of when you get knocked to 0 hit points, you fall unconscious and make death saving throws, right? That's not how it works anymore. When you get knocked to 0, you get severely hindered. So we have these dying levels, or that are measured by wounds. It's a similar concept where if you take damage, or if you do make a death saving throw and you fail, you get an additional wound which hinders you even more, but you can still act. You can still make a choice, even though you just won't be as fully functional, right? You might get knocked prone. You might only be able to crawl. You might have disadvantage on attack rolls, whatever it is. You can still make a choice. So I think that adds a lot more engagement for people who get knocked prone, or I mean, would get knocked unconscious. So instead of just waiting for your turn and then rolling a death saving throw and yeah, I succeeded but didn't roll a 20, or yay, or nay, I failed, whatever. There's more to it, and it's much more engaging. And we've also tied in rules for injuries. So if you get hit and knocked to 0, you might lose an arm, or you might lose an eye, or your leg might get significantly wounded, and you have to learn how to accommodate and adjust to that.
Yeah, and I've run these rules before, and I have to say sometimes this little change can make for the most epic scenes in role play, right? Because now you're injured and you have this choice to make. Do I try and stabilize myself, or do I say, you know what, we need to take this villain down. I'm gonna take an action even if it hurts me further and prevents me from helping myself. And even once you're past the point of being able to do anything yourself and you're still not unconscious, you can make that sort of spiteful last speech before death and spit in the face of your enemy, right? And it gives you this epic moment that's really memorable at the table. So I think it's a great change.
Yeah, I'm very happy with how they've panned out, and I like the injuries a lot too. But I'm also a little bit malicious as a DM.
Same. I'm in addition to the sci-fi and the fantasy settings I played, I typically run a Lovecraft campaign, and so it's death and destruction all the time.
Yep.
So in addition to what we've talked about so far, another thing that I think is an improvement on fifth edition is we have sort of I don't know if codified or introduced is the right word, but we've added these conditions, both beneficial and detrimental, and they sort of almost act like keywords, I think, and sort of reduce the complexity of some of the other features in the game, like spells and abilities. Can you tell us a little bit more about how our new condition system sort of works?
So we have added a lot of new conditions. There's at least 30 I can think of offhand, and they've been split into beneficial and detrimental, which, as it sounds, the beneficial are good and the detrimental are bad. One of the big things we've done with these is they are leveled conditions. Think like how exhaustion is, where exhaustion, if you get more levels, you suffer that level and everything before it. So we have a bunch of new beneficial and detrimental conditions with these levels designed to encourage strategic gameplay, right? So 2 people could be using the same debuff on a creature, and instead of it occurring simultaneously but not stacking, now they do if they use these leveled ones. And so everybody can get access to these in some way, and it can, again, really encourage strategic gameplay. And the same deal with buffs. So these beneficial conditions, if multiple people use them on the same one, they stack, but they stacked only to a certain limit. So it's really fun for things like temporary hit points, where instead of having 2 different features that both grant temporary hit points, maybe they grant one level of a condition that gives temporary hit points, and instead of them not stacking, now they do because it's the condition. So I think I'm very excited about these. I think this is one of the coolest things we've done. I'm going to say that every time. But I think it just really, I'm going to use the word strategic gameplay over and over again because that's really what they encourage.
Yeah, and I think it also just helps tighten up some of the work, right? Because now a spell like haste, instead of listing out all the things it gives you, it can just reference the condition track that sort of enables haste. And now haste is not just a binary; it's a gradient, and you can have sort of infra haste where we're not quite as hasted as the haste spell, and super haste where you're even more powerful, which is kind of a neat thing.
Yep, and exactly that. So if 2 people cast haste on the same person, there's a benefit to doing that, right? Because I believe haste only gives 4 levels of the hasted condition, and there's a 6-level track. So if 2 people both give it, they jump right to 6, and now that person is even more empowered, right? So there's a lot of things like that. Haste is a simple example because it's a popular beneficial spell. But yeah, there's a lot like that. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, and also it allows for not that it was impossible before, but some of the spells and powers that are considered hit or suck, right? Where you either get the villain and they suffer a very large penalty, or nothing bad happens. It's a lot easier to do a little bit of a gradation there, where now if you hit them, yeah, they're stunned, but if you don't hit them, well, they're not stunned, but there's at least a little incremental difference that you've made, so you haven't sort of wasted your turn entirely. So again, we're trying to make it so that the players don't feel like they've wasted their turn ever. That just does not feel good.
Yep, and yeah, that's exactly it, right? So instead of a spell save or suck, instead of a spell being stunned or bust, now it's 4 levels of stun or 2 levels of stun. That's a fake example, but it's not a complete failure or on your end if they succeed.
Right. Maybe now we could turn to sort of future books that we're planning, and I want to emphasize this because sometimes to me it's felt like in other products they've come out with an initial book, and then everything else that's been developed afterward, they didn't think through it carefully, and now they're stuck in a situation where the next set of rules doesn't really gel or fit with or expound correctly off of the original rules. But we're trying to take a holistic approach to this. And why don't you talk a little bit more about what our plan is?
Yep, so that's exactly it. So I have 6 books planned. Now, part of this you will have seen if you've played SW5E, you'll have seen some of the mechanics from those books. But basically, I've been planning ahead. The idea being that all 6 of these books will work together without there being an unnecessary amount of errata or changes. So things that are established in this core book might not be super important until book 4 comes out, and then that book expands on them, but doesn't change them. It just makes them more important, more engaging. So that is something that I would say that we're doing. That's very, very important. And I mentioned 6 books. You may have seen another video I did talking about those 6 books, but either way, we have plans for a total of 6 books that create this one epic gaming suite that can again be used in any setting.
Yeah, and I think people that are interested in this Kickstarter or want to learn more about it can get a feel for that, because SW5E exists out there that you created and I've contributed to, and they can see how, for example, the Starships book fits with the core rules. It adds to it. It uses concepts of 5E, but they're also disentangleable. And for example, like the classes of the Starships book are an add-on to your normal classes, and so you're not hamstrung by choices you made as a character to be an engineer or to be a fighter. You can be a fighter, but also be a mechanic on the ship, for example. And just because you don't have high intelligence doesn't mean that you don't know the skills to work a starship. So people that are interested out there can go check out SW5E, and not that everything's going to be working exactly the same as SW5E does, but they can get a flavor for sort of the approach that we're taking with the add-on books.
Yeah, I would say that SW5E is a pretty dynamic preview because it's been public and free for years. So if you want to think about if Unbound Realms and you're not sold on these videos, check out SW5E because it's that, but it's dialed up to 11. So that will give you a strong idea.
So anybody who's not interested in running through the SW5E rules or playing their own SW5E game, there's a really simple solution for that too, right? Where can they check out SW5E in action?
So this was mind blowing. So I want you guys to understand that this was one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me in my life, and I had nothing to do with it. So a very big actual play you may have heard of called Dimension 20 used the SW5E rules for their campaign called A Starstruck Odyssey. So if you're not interested in reading, which is very reasonable, maybe you don't want to, you could check out the A Starstruck Odyssey actual play from Dimension 20 on Dropout TV. They have, I think it's 18 episodes. It's awesome. I've watched it twice. It's such an amazing utilization of the rules and a great story. So if you don't want to read the rules, check that out, and that might give you an idea of these mechanics if there's something you want to use.
Yeah, and they have examples of both the base rules and the Starship rules because it's Starship heavy.
Correct. Yep. Yep. So they use classes from SW5E. They actually, Emily did this whole customized casting thing. I'd never once considered it, but she used a class from SW5E that didn't use tech casting, and she used tech casting instead. So that was mind blowing as well, because I never once considered that a thing, and now it's a very core part of Unbound Realms. So yeah, it is. It's an incredible watch, regardless, and it's a very cool utilization of the rules to check out. Especially they did a lot with the starship mechanics.
So Steve, you talked a lot about all of these different options. You mentioned that there are 40 fighting style trees, each with 3 options. We've talked about the different spells and the origins. It seems like a lot is going on here. Should people feel like this is overwhelming or no?
If you tried to look at every single thing at once, if you opened the book to every single page at the same time, you would feel overwhelmed. I wrote it and I would feel overwhelmed. The key is to progress naturally. So you start the book in chapter 1 and you end the book in appendix, whatever the 10th letter of the alphabet is. So if you do things in the appropriate order, it's not overwhelming at all. It's just if you try to do everything at once, it will be. But really, there's just so much depth, so much flavor. My goal is to enable any reasonable play style. So there's going to be a spellcasting champion who is very similar to fighter. There will be an archon who is our full spellcaster who can also dabble in tech. Really, just the goal is that across all these permutations, any reasonable play style can be enabled.
And I think anybody familiar with the 5e system should feel pretty much at home here. I mean, obviously there are differences. We've talked about a lot of the differences here today in this video, but really the bones are 5e. My players are not good at picking up new rules. But when we've done SW5e and when we've done Unbound Realms rules that I've introduced into our games, they pick them up right away. The bones are there. They understand the concepts. It's just some new nuances in rule differences and more options at character creation time, I think.
Yeah, and more cohesive mechanic implementation. So, for instance, cover in 5e, there are 3 tiers of cover. There's full cover, and then there's half and 3/4. Now there are 3 tiers of partial cover, which are engaged with by fighting styles and items and stuff like that. So I think overall the mechanics are more cohesive rather than these different things that just kind of exist at the same time. Yeah, I would say that it's a more comprehensive experience. Everything works better together, and it's much more customizable.
So for people that are maybe in the 5e world and they're thinking about switching over to another system, perhaps to Unbound Realms, what can they continue to use? How are they going to do encounter design if they jump over to Unbound Realms, for example?
Currently, encounter design is still using the core 5e rules where you use an experience budget and generate encounters that way. I will develop and release a system that evolves beyond that at some point, but for now, those mechanics do work very well. The better utilization of action economy does lead to more powerful characters, so you would want to just make encounters a little bit harder, typically about 1 or 2 levels higher than you would use. So if you're making an encounter for 4 third-level characters, instead make an encounter for 4 fourth-level characters. And that will really help bring in the difference. I've also got rules for monsters to make monsters more interesting. I have monster roles, monster elements to make. If you want to take a wolf, you can turn a wolf into a lightning wolf. I have rules for that. If you want to take a wolf and turn it into a tank, or if you want to do a support-oriented wolf, these are things you can layer right on top of an existing stat block to make an encounter of, say, 4 wolves more than just 4 wolves. So there is a lot of changes coming, but for now, those rules do work very well.
Yeah, I think 2 points to make here. I think one is that I think we've with our experience in other gaming systems, especially with 4th edition, I think we've pulled several things that 4th edition got right and pulled concepts there into the 5e framework, which is really I think perfected what 5e started many years ago. And then in terms of encounter design, I have been running SW5E for a number of years, and I think the power level difference with Unbound Realms to base 5th edition is similar to SW5E and 5th edition, and it's really easy and second nature to do encounter design at this point. Like you said, it's really just making those encounters just slightly more difficult because of slightly better early action economy, I think.
Yep, that's really the biggest thing. So there's more power level because of versatility, but it's really the action economy. The fact that a fighter can do more than just attack on their turn. They have something to do with their bonus action, and they can proactively use their reaction and stuff like that. That's really the biggest key difference that requires slightly more challenging encounters. And you can do that by giving monsters bonus actions and reactions as well, which is what the roles that I've created really do. It just gives them something to do with their bonus action and reaction, so they're more paired. There's more parity with the player characters.
Okay, Steve. So maybe to sum up this video or to bring it to a close, let's talk a little bit about who should be interested in this and who should check it out a little bit more. Let's say I've been playing 5e maybe a little bit. I've been role playing, so I'm kind of bored with what's going on. Is this for me?
So I would say that it is. So Unbound Realms is very customizable, right? The options you have in 5e are very limited compared to what you get here. Again, there's a choice at every level, asterisk, from 3 to 17. So there's a lot more going on. Additionally, I would say the versatility of Unbound Realms and that you can play in so many different settings, such as a sci-fi universe or a Wild West campaign or the traditional high fantasy or a Lovecraftian world. All of those things can be enabled. So I would say that if you are bored with 5e, you could still very much like Unbound Realms, and it would not require a lot to get into.
Yeah, from my perspective as a GM, besides all the rules and mechanics that I love and think elevate the gameplay experience, I want to say that I think even if that weren't the case here, I'd love the system just because I could use it in all those different settings. I have a bunch of players, and they are not going to be learning new rules every time we want to switch a genre. And being able to stay in the fifth edition wheelhouse, but really be able to easily play in another setting is invaluable to me as a GM. So yeah, I echo that. That's a great point. What if you're a sort of a new player and you just want to dabble in the 5e world for the first time? Is this a good starting place?
So if you've never played 5e or played any TTRPG at all, you could very much jump into Unbound Realms. You would want to pay more attention to the book, specifically the first chapter that walks you through building a character. And you would want to rely on those people you play with who have more experience, because it is not more convoluted, but there is analysis paralysis. And that's a bigger thing when you have a lot more choices. So you could absolutely play this as a new player, somebody with no experience, but it would be more daunting than traditional 5e, certainly.
Yeah, Steve, I completely agree that this is a good system for new players. Something that we haven't talked about already on this call is some of the simplifications we've done, especially around nomenclature, that I think makes the Unbound Realm system even more approachable than 5e, even if there are elements that are more difficult. Both of us have been running the SW5E servers, the Discord servers, so we hear all kinds of questions from new players. And the simplest things get mixed up. For example, new players being confused about having a fifth level character. That means, of course, that they can cast fifth level spells because they have the same name. But of course, that's wrong. And so we've changed the name for that just so a spell is now by degree instead of by level. So now it's clear that those are not the same thing. So we've done a special effort to everything having a unique and descriptive name.
Yep, that's exactly it. So there's a lot of things like clarity like that. Like that's one of the most common questions from newer players. So that solidifies it, right? It also turns fireball into a third degree burn. That was the greatest revelation when we decided that word. Additionally, I'm just defining keywords, right? Expertise is now a keyword instead of something that has to be defined every time it's used. We define terms such as bloodied. A bloodied creature is a creature that is at or below half their hit point maximum. A healthy creature is a creature that is above half their hit point maximum. So we define all these key words that can then play with mechanics and don't have to repeat the same text over and over again. So it makes it a lot more referential. It makes it a lot easier to reference things like a glossary or an index. It's much better decisions for long-term help.
Yeah, I agree. So, one group that we haven't touched upon yet that might be the most interested in this game is someone coming from 5e who's an expert in 5e. Why would they want to migrate over to Unbound Realms instead of sticking with what they're an expert in?
Simply put, if you're an expert in 5e, you've probably done theory crafted, or otherwise munchkined every real permutation of characters. I dare you to do that with Unbound Realms. I mean, there's 40 fighting style trees that are tapped into by more than half the classes. There are 12 casting style trees. That's 36 features, right? And you can mix and match. So I would be impressed if somebody wanted to spend all their time theory crafting all the best builds in Unbound Realms. I would absolutely heartily engage with it. But either way, it's just so much more. So if you're familiar with 5e, Unbound Realms just goes further in the directions that I think are the most important.
Yeah, so I think that covers, a lot of the basic potential pools of people that should be looking at this. Let's say they're interested. Why back the Kickstarter, Steve?
Kickstarter will, of course, get you the first access to the physical book. It will get you immediate access to the content. We haven't really talked about this yet, but the book is basically done. So it's just a matter of revisions and people having the opportunity to play test it. And that's what will be occurring immediately after the Kickstarter. So it gets you quicker access. It gets you the first copies of the book, whether you go for the digital or the digital and physical copies. And it will also get you free bonus content. What that content is yet, we haven't decided, but you will get additional content for free if you back the Kickstarter. That will not be available after the Kickstarter, though that content may appear in later books.
Yeah, and it's great to back the Kickstarter as well because it gives us the opportunity to respond to requests that the fan base has, potentially have more products available, whether physical or digital, earlier on. And that interest level that we can gauge from the Kickstarter is really the way that we sort of plan out that business strategy going forward, and what we can provide and bring to the fan base.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are the other things people want? Do they want spell cards? Is that something that enough people want that we could actually function? We could create them. Do people want a custom GM screen? These are the things that we need to know, and the Kickstarter is the best place to learn them.
So, with that, I think we're done for today. Thanks everyone for their time, and I hope you are excited as we are for this project.
Absolutely.
All right. See you, Steve.